Right. Another totally rewarding chats. Another international version. That's what we like. We bring in the international guests. Um, and that is not Paul Ryman. We have not thrown Chicagoland out of the area. How's it going?
It's going well. I feel like I've seen a graphic where, it's politically oriented, where Chicago is part of a different country, right? Where they take sort of the northern states and decide that we should be Canadian. But no, as of today, we are definitely still part of the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Massachusetts is generally in that one, to
I
be
think I
fair.
think
Like,
we I
yeah,
think
we're,
you
we're,
joined
we're
that country
pretty,
too.
pretty
Yeah,
early in there.
that's right.
Yeah. Um, and we are lucky today to have Kelly Light with us from the UK, making it the international piece. How's it going, Kelly?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Enjoying our
Uh,
lovely warm weather at the moment.
Warm weather, but also as of this recording, soon to come later, I can see Paul's face. The UK or England is still playing soccer. Yes.
Yeah.
Is that good or bad? Actually, are you are you excited about that or
Yeah,
not?
no, we're not a massive footballing family, but I like to follow it when it's the World Cup. So, I'm
Okay.
a football tourist,
Yeah,
hated by many for that reason. I don't follow a team, but I do like watching the World Cup. My husband's not interested at all, but my girls both
yeah.
play football for a local team. So,
There you
Okay.
go. I think that I had to explain to my family just yesterday, actually. The question was, why are all of the matches now at like 2 or 3 in the afternoon? And my response was, because that's not 2 or 3 in the afternoon where all of these teams
Yeah.
actually are, right? So you actually don't have to stay up until 2 in the morning to watch a match anymore. Now that we've moved the schedule to be more conducive to
The last
Europeans.
one was harsh though. So all my
Yeah,
UK soccer, football friends and all that, they stayed up, and that
right.
thing started like at 2,
That's right. But
and
now it's moved. Right
yeah,
now the schedule has shifted earlier. There's one more primetime game on Saturday. That's it. And then it's European friendly time zones.
that's right. Um, so that we don't screw it up, more particularly me, Kelly. Give us your background, like where you are now and how you got there.
well, like a lot of people in HR, I didn't start off in HR and I kind of fell into HR by accident. I think this is a really common story. I actually worked in advertising sales for the first good decade, really, of my career. Um, and then I went and did some traveling and I came back and I was looking for a role and ended up getting some temp work in HR as an entry level HR admin. And because I'm quite handy with spreadsheets. I gravitated more and more and more towards what was comp and ben at the time and is now rewards. And I've now been working in the reward field for more than 20 years, I think.
It's from Paul's career trajectory. I will not the only reason, but Paul will self confess. One of the things that escalated his career early was his spreadsheet capability.
Oh, totally.
At the time.
So the only thing, I mean, it was
Yeah.
literally what got me 2 promotions, I think, in the first few years was my willingness to write macros in Excel.
Yeah.
There
And
you go.
maybe we'll get there in the comment, because I know it's come up several times that that is not the prime skill anymore, right? Things are changing. And so, like, people who get in, and it is a common theme, Kelly. We've had people, I don't think we've had anyone from advertising sales yet, but we've had like 2 out of, all the guests that were like in college were like, you know what I want to be when I grow up? I want to be in HR and maybe in total rewards. Everyone else has
No.
matriculated across from a wide and varied path of careers.
For sure.
It would actually
Yeah.
be cool to map out, I don't know, through LinkedIn somewhere, Paul, totally different thing, to
Yeah.
go get like all the people that are current heads of total rewards and find
See
out
where they
where they
came from.
started. Like, go
Yeah.
back and look at the first job on LinkedIn and be like, I will bet it is one of the widest, most
Yeah.
varied career starting,
Yeah.
where people start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be fascinating.
So before we dive in, Kelly, we have this fun, 5 speed round questions. If you're ready. So, are you coffee or tea?
Tea, 100% true Brit.
And is there a tea brand, or are you a tea snob? Because you're a Brit, I will ask. We've had
No,
one in the US. We might send him over your way from the Chicago area, actually.
yeah.
So,
No, just any good, strong English breakfast tea. I tend to drink the brands from the north of the country, without naming any brand names.
we're okay with brand names. What do you have? Like, help us out. We actually have one of the
Yorkshire.
guests that was on prior.
Yorkshire
He's
tea. Yeah.
what is it?
Yorkshire tea.
Yorkshire Tier.
There
Okay.
you go. This episode of Totally Rewarding Chats, unofficially sponsored by
Sponsor.
Yorkshire Tea.
Yeah. We'll tag them and see what they say.
That's right.
It's Yorkshire
You never
Tier.
know.
Yeah, that's true. So I know from prior, you're not a football family. Are you guys a sports family, or what is the hobby of choice? Because I think the assumption from most Americans, I mean, the World Cup's going, is that all Brits just sit around and play soccer and then drink beer. So
No.
what do you guys do?
Well, we're more into the arts. My husband did a fine art degree at Wimbledon Uni. But our girls we do spend a lot of time around football because our daughters both play for Hastings United. Under
Okay.
14s it will be this new season. So we do spend quite a lot of time at football and enjoying football.
Okay.
But that's probably more me and the girls than my husband. So we are unusual in that sense. But he'd rather go to an art gallery.
FYI for the non-UK people, Wimbledon has a university, not just tennis courts.
Yeah.
One of the first times I went out that way, I won't lie, it was a true traditional American bias moment. I went out to the Wimbledon stop and was like, wait, there's stuff out here. Like beyond tennis. I totally was like in this, that's the only thing I'd ever heard mode when you get out there.
Yeah.
The really important one here, Kelly, because that'll determine who is your friend or not the rest of the show. If you have a weekend away, we do have to say that it's your kids are busy somewhere away and your partner's away. So this is 100% your choice. Are you going to a posh resort or camping out in the woods?
Oh, posh resort. Sorry.
I mean,
Paul's not sorry.
What we are coming to learn is
luxury, aircon,
totally.
massage.
Well, you don't have to lean into it, Kelly.
She's just, this is like, this is a US phrase, I think, but she's dunking on you. It's like, I'm not just going to agree with Paul, but I'm going to point out how wrong you are, Sean, in this process.
The problem, I think my fundamental problem, Paul, has been I've been selecting people to come on here based on their total rewards, acumen, and genius, not based on this question. So it's not helping me. That's my problem.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to bias the sample, Sean, if you really want to win.
Yeah, I got to work on that. For those listening outside the UK, because I love outside of London, what is your favorite or the spot you would recommend most for people to visit outside of London in England?
Oh, that's a question. I think one of the most spectacular and breathtaking places to visit, if you can handle the cold, even in the middle of summer, is Edinburgh. It's absolutely beautiful, and there's a castle. But also my hometown, it's pretty cool. By the seaside, come to Hastings, learn about the battle.
Huh? Okay. So you do you provide a tour guide for a day too?
Yeah, a lot of the time, yes. I think I probably do end up doing that inadvertently for visitors. When we first moved to the coast, for the first year, I literally felt like I was running a B&B because all friends and family that wouldn't normally want to come stay with us for a weekend suddenly wanted to come stay for the weekend. So
that's how you know you picked a great place to live. And I will add, I need to get to that area. As we had talked about at some point prior, when I've tend to gone to the South Coast, I go, the surfing's better over on what you guys call, interesting, the North-South Coast. It's the north part of the South Coast, or the western side. If you look at the map, Paul, like the western side over by Cornwall or whatever, there's actually amazingly great surfing, which you don't think of the UK and surfing, but it's amazing surfing down on that part, which is different from where she lives. And so I need to get over there. So let's get to the last question, which is always interesting for non-Americans. Do you prefer crunchy or creamy peanut butter?
I think probably smooth.
So, that's right.
Smooth.
They don't have creamy. It's
not
smooth.
creamy.
The reason it's always interesting, Kelly, is when I go to the UK, we have the flat in South Lambeth. Buying peanut butter is significantly easier. In the US, there's giant shelves of it, like many brands, many stock, many whatever. Over there, like I go to Sainsbury's near the flat, there's a jar of smooth. And so like, that's the one, makes picking very easy. Cause
Yeah.
it is I don't even think I realized until we started asking this question all the time, what an American phenomenon peanut butter was,
Yeah.
or nut butter in general,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
was. So, you've been in the UK a while, you fell into it. So, start with kind of the best practices you've seen over the span of your career around comp and ben, like some of the things you have to have in place, and some of the things you've seen, that make a program really successful, and some things that you're like, they're either overhyped or don't do them type of items.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, one of the classic fundamentals in comp is to talk about ensuring that the comp strategy is aligned with the business strategy. And I think that's a more complicated question than people realize. And it's much harder to achieve than people realize. And I guess what I mean by that is, I mean, I've worked in different sectors. For example, in terms of extremes, I spent a long time working in a sector where the number one customer was government. So the appetite for risk there is very, very low. Decisions are slow to be made and heavily documented and very evidence-based. To a much smaller organization that's independently owned and is in the high-tech sector and wants to be very mobile, where coming from one to the other, it feels like the literal Wild West with people shooting from the hip. And so I think there's a real oversimplification of the concept of business strategy. It's not necessarily just about the growth objectives or the growth targets. You can talk to leadership about your pay strategy and benchmarking. Do we want to benchmark to the 50th percentile of the market or the 75th? And are we going to have the same approach across all roles, or are we going to differentiate more senior roles? I mean, and that's, as someone who grew up from quite a socialist background, that's the concept, that you can kind of struggle with. It's like, how is that fair? But what does that mean? And what does leadership really want to focus on and drive? Where do we need to drive improvement? So that's an interesting one about business strategy and this.
Yeah.
Go
Well,
on.
I think you're right. I think the definition of business strategy, I put that in little quotes, like what exactly do you mean by that? And, I've been around a lot of comp functions in my career, run a few as well. And, whether or not the business is trying to be a sort of innovation driver versus a penetrate existing accounts sort of, or a change and go to market, honestly, it only changes about this much of how we thought about pay. You're asking different questions, which is more the how you want to run as an organization. That needs to inform, how you think about pay. And we in our consulting work, we put that into sort of this comp philosophy thinking, right? Your comp philosophy is not just what percentile, it's what is that business context? How does your people strategy sort of affect the way that you want to pay, both in terms of how much and how people experience it? So that I'm 100% aligned with you that it's not as simple as, oh yeah, we're a growing company, so let's pay this way. Like what? Like that is not how we do this at all. There's a much more nuanced way of thinking about what a quote unquote comp strategy really needs to be. 100%.
Well, I think you raise a really great point, Kelly, around, you and Paul are in different departments and, you're both great performers. And on paper, or if a consultant comes in sometimes like, well, we're going to pay these departments different. We're going to have different merit. We're going to pay, Paul's department P40 and we're going to pay your department P60 because it's integral to the business and we have aligned to the business strategy. But then the human part of it starts to come in and someone's like, yeah, but Paul's amazing. I need to give him more money. And then like, well, but Paul's not disagreeing with me. He'd like more money.
I'll take it.
If people can't see his face, like he's like, I'll take the money. But how do you? It becomes very personal really quick when the numbers have names and faces, and you're like, actually, we can't do that. And then, well, your whole strategy is to do that. And so once you do it for Paul, like the whole thing falls apart because then they're like, well, Anne over in the other department also is a great thing, and all of a sudden, like, well, we were doing what we were supposed to do. And so how do you make that happen? And then how do you communicate that to Paul to be like, you're a rock star. I know Kelly got a big increase because, you're in the same building or you're in the same division. And he's like, I'm as good as her. What's up? And so how do you communicate that as well? So I think there's a lot more complexities, like you highlighted, Kelly, than people say when you actually go from let's align to the practicality of making it happen.
That's right. And then you're really talking about appetite for risk because there's more and more legislation around equal pay. You're then talking about the business appetite for risk and how you're going to manage that risk. Because, if you wanted to protect a business from not ever having a pay gap for work of equal value of greater than plus or minus 5% that you can't explain, that means we'll have to eradicate salary ranges. They will have to go practically, because it goes, instead of from like 80 to 120% in a range around a midpoint, it goes from 97.5% to 102.5%. That is the contraction that you're seeing if you wanted to guarantee no risk of a pay gap greater than plus or minus 5% for a worker category. So then what does a business do then if it wants to really embrace a performance, a pay for performance culture? So how do you get to that? And that means really having performance related pay. And it's going to be much harder to really document and evidence objectives, and how objective setting has been gender neutral and it's robust and it's not about discretion. It's all evidence based, and that the potential make work around supporting a pay for performance or performance related pay, if you really start to narrow salary ranges, base salary, is going to be, that's going to potentially have quite a big demand on resources of line managers and HR as a function. And I'm interested to see how, with the advent of the new pay transparency legislation across Europe, I'm really interested to see that evolution over the next 5 years.
Let's see let's take that through, because I think it's interesting because it's equal pay for equal work. Right.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. The resistance to change, or the fear of, having issues, is like, oh, I'll create this 5% range. Right. And now really good work is 102.5, and really, not great work is 97.5. And is that enough to keep high performers so they won't matriculate out? Do you move the range up based on them so that and overpay the others? Or do you really try to go document all this? And is it really like defensible as you go? As we talk about EUPTD, the first place I want to start, just because you're there, is the UK. So the UK's pay gap is a raw pay gap of 5%. So you can find this hard to believe, those that listen. I have opinions on that.
Never.
But what are your thoughts on where it's at now, and where do you think it's going as a starting point?
So I think one of the really important things to talk about around the pay gap calculations is that I worry about how well understood the metric is and what it represents. And I think one of the key skills in reward is to find a way to educate senior leaders on what these metrics really mean without them feeling patronized. Because a lot of senior leaders, no offense, senior leaders out there in the world, they think they know a lot. They might think they've heard it all before and seen it all before. So it's a real skill and reward to try and tactfully be able to educate people without them realizing that that's what you're sort of trying to do. And understanding that the raw gender pay gap is really not about equal pay for work of equal value or equal pay at all. It's about the glass ceiling, really, and about representation through the ranks across the organization, and women being represented in senior roles. I think that's really important to make that really clear. And so from that perspective, I think it is interesting, and I think it is interesting to see the improvement, and trying to network with senior females across industry in all kinds of roles, the variation in terms of appetite for exposure to the C-suite, and the sense of actually imposter syndrome that a lot of people, and that's not gender specific necessarily, that people suffer with, it's something I can relate to personally a lot. So I think that's the challenge with the metric. I just don't think it's really well understood.
Yeah. Well,
the math, the reason I pick on the UK, and I don't know if you were going here, Paul, was you can be inside of the 5% raw pay gap, which is the measurement, and be a really shitty payer. You could be a great payer and be outside the gap. And then we'll come back to opportunity equity, because I think that is one of the biggest issues. Yeah.
And I think I love to pick on the UK gender pay gap report just because it's easy to pick on, but we also need to give a little bit of credit. Like, they were pioneers in requiring organizations to acknowledge this and disclose it publicly. Now, I think because the math is flawed, let's just call it like it is, and I was in-house when that came out, it was pretty easy to do the Jedi hand wave and tell everybody, come on, the math is bad, ignore it, here's what happens, right? And I actually think the UK has created some of the complexities of the EU directive, where the EU directive is trying to innovate away from those gaps, or those, shouldn't use the word gap twice in the same, but iterate away from those limitations of the UK gender gap report. But it's also then pointing out how hard it is to do that well and consistently and with low administrative costs, right? So somewhere between flawed math, but relatively easy administration, and really complex administration that is also difficult. Like, there's going to be this thing that I'm hoping both the UK and the EU will sort of, progress towards. So that's sort of the math picking point. I still think, Sean and Kelly, both of you the UK isn't really about the same thing. It's not about equal pay for equal work. It's really about opportunity equity, because that's what drives the variance exclusively. It really has nothing to do with equal pay for equal work. They're both valid constructs, and just how do we sort of demonstrate those together, in a consistent way, I think is where I hope both will land.
Yeah, and maybe if
I
they
actually think that. Oh, go ahead, Kelly.
Even if they'd maybe given it another name, called it something different. The name itself is, I mean, although it's maybe technically accurate, the name, it doesn't, I don't think it is a great reflection of what the metric is really trying to show.
Yeah, correct. I think it'll fix itself on over time, because I do think there'll be some major names at some point who are like, will force the issue, because they're like, because it's less about the fines for some of the large companies. I mean, they don't want to spend the money, but it's more about the court of public opinion, to which everyone thinks you're a bad payer.
Yeah.
And they're going to go back and be like, actually, the math says we're a great payer. We do all these things, like get me off the naughty list, and they're going to push legislation to kind of get there. And I agree, Paul, like they were the first. And then, anyone who goes first, to your point of being out there and doing stuff and how risk averse you are, the UK was kind of like, we're going to make this happen. It's not going to be great to start. And so then the Americans, we're picking on them. Meanwhile, we don't have legislation nationally. So kind of hard for us to really pick at them. And then the opportunity equity thing is actually really interesting, that it highlights that, Kelly, and that you bring that up, because in the States, we see very little looking at that, a lot less than I think we should when people do pay equity. They look at the transparency piece, and then they go run the math. And they don't even solve some of the problems. Like for me, it's always, minimum position and range. And so in theory, if you hire a female at a lower rate to start for all the wrong reasons, probably, and then you promote them and you cap how much you can pay them, as an increase, and then they get promoted again, like we just continue to make a bad problem worse. Even when we give them more opportunity, we don't always do it right. So I think there's some really cool things around the UK pay gap, and I think it'll keep moving. At the speed of government. I think that's also the problem, is it's a government. So people are like, well, how fast are they going to go? And I'm like, not very. It's a government. How do you see that translating? I know you do a lot of work too with the EUPTD. So I'd be curious, because, June has come and gone. The magic, oh my God, it's going to happen in June, is going to happen. And now what. And so as a UK-based company and with all you know in the EUPTD, how are you seeing that kind of shake out from it happened, but
Ish.
didn't, and how are companies reacting?
One of our, my current company, one of our jurisdictions where we've got a reasonably significant headcount, the legislation has gone live. So, and we are actively working through our response to the legislation and the implementation of the legislation. So it certainly is starting to have teeth, for sure. And it will be, again, around the narrative that supports it, and the difference between the raw data and then the adjusted data, where you might then narrow down the population further to look at performance ratings or time in role, experience in role, where where that's not legally tenuous. Like in the UK, that can be quite legally tenuous because it can be indirect age discrimination. So you have to be careful. But in some countries, seniority or tenure it is a real accepted barometer for where you should be in the pay range. So it's having a global strategic approach and then responding locally, nationally, and comparing the actual legislation in the EU directive with the local, how that's been locally transposed.
Yeah.
Where some countries are going further than the legislation, and some countries are adding a little bit of protection that isn't in the EU directive. For example, if you look at Italy, where the legislation has gone live, they have gone further than the legislation, than the directive, in that they are requiring salary information to be put in job ads, which isn't in the directive. The directive doesn't go quite that far, but they're limiting the number of times an employee can request average pay of their peers by gender to once a year. And they've gone a little further than the directive, and that helps with the administrative burden.
Yeah.
So it's go on.
No, I was just curious. One of the theories I had back, pre-June, was that even with differences existing by country, and maybe not all countries get there, right? Sweden's going to say no and whatnot, but there's going to be enough that happens in June that makes it just impossible to operate well if you try to sort of go country to country all the time, right? Like, it was a prediction, which I think is wrong, and that's where I want to get your feedback. And maybe it's because only a few have implemented something.
Yeah.
So for now, everybody's still picking and choosing, rather than, oh my gosh, I can't do this 17 different ways. I'm just going to do it this way and hope for the best. So I guess, like, how are you seeing, your own organization, if you can share, or your, peers you speak with, like, how are you implementing, given that it's just a couple, and other than Italy, it's a couple of small ones in most cases,
Yeah.
right? Is it just fine, we'll do what Italy says and we'll wait for everyone else? Or are you seeing that you are starting to operate differently, even in countries that haven't fully transposed yet?
We're kind of taking the approach. So the approach to putting it out there and then waiting to see how each country then responds. The risk, in my view, of taking that approach is that if you then have a local country that legislates quite far away from the directive or quite far away from what you've rolled out, you could be in a position where you have to completely change your calculation methodology for that country, and possibly statistics you've then shared with employees. And then you have to explain why it's different, why we're changing it.
All right. So we have Kelly back. So what we're going to do, we rarely audit or edit, Paul, as we go. But
we should, but we don't.
we probably should, but we are, as Kelly. So for the first moments, Kelly, I actually thought you just had enough of me and you were like, I'm done. And in the middle, like, I can't take any more of this, and bailed out. So I'm glad you came back. We're going to grab out the 5 minutes of Paul and I bantering about our interwebs issues ourselves. And if it makes you feel any better, Kelly, ironically, I've only dropped one time on a podcast that I've either hosted or been on one time, and it was when I had Paul Ryman as a guest in the original piece. So I can't even pretend like it didn't happen. And in one of our best and most popular episodes, Paul's video went out. So, people really enjoyed the fact that we could listen to
Didn't
Paul
have to look at me
genius,
anymore.
but didn't have to look at him.
That's right.
So that was good.
Yes.
So let's just pick up. So you were talking about, which makes sense. You've got multiple jurisdictions. Those jurisdictions, do you because that was kind of the place Paul beat me to it. The reasons that you kind of go one by one right now were the legislative pieces, but also then the expectations of the employees, I think is where you were going.
Yes, and the communication. So what we want to avoid is being in a situation where we might have shared information and published statistics, and then find that the way that the local government has transposed the directive means we have to redo it and then explain why calculations or figures have changed. So from that perspective, we are taking, or my advice is to do a little bit of wait and see. At the same time, you're prepping, right? So you're taking what you understand of the directive, you're making sure that you'll be able to meet the requirements for each country under the directive. And then you're having that ready, you're doing your data audits under legal privilege where you can so that you've got a chance to have a look what's under the bonnet before you and fix anything you want to fix before you have to start sharing this information with employees and their representatives. But then you're waiting and seeing what kind of overlay or additional flavor a specific country might bring before you go live. That's my advice, or the approach that I would be taking right now for those reasons. I mean, there's usually more than one right answer, and it depends on your particular circumstances. And if you're, even if you decide to go with the country that goes the furthest and then mirror that globally until all the countries have gone, you don't know what the furthest is going to be.
So with all that in mind, if companies are looking at it, you've got that piece. What are the couple of things as companies are looking at EUPTD and UK pay gap? What are the couple of things you think absolutely have to be in place right now to kind of wind through here? Because I do I say that from the standpoint of the deadlines are fluid now. Like the one thing we all thought was happening, like Paul, was they were all going to somehow merge onto the highway magically. And on June 8th, you would have been able to look back and say, to your point, here's all the stuff. What's the best way we're going to tackle it? And so for companies moving forward, wherever they are, what do you think the best couple of things you need to have in place so that you can be reactive are?
I think the fundamental, probably absolute must have is to have clearly understood what you determine as and how you will interrogate and be able to defend what you are describing as work of equal value in your organization. How are you doing that? How have you checked it? How have you tested it? Because this is cross-functional. It's no longer good enough to say it's the same job. I mean, and there's lots and lots of case law in most of the developed economies. There's been some very, very famous, massive case law in the UK around this, even though the UK is not technically going to fall under the legislation, the directive. Massive case law where you've got in a very large, well-known supermarket, the people working on the checkouts claiming that they're doing work of equal value to the people working in the warehouse. There was a very clear gender bias across those two populations. So it's the work of equal value is the real important nugget here. And to have your methodologies or how you're going to evaluate that, to make sure that you've checked it, tested it, that you understand it, that the teams around you, the HR business partners, the HR advisors, line managers, maybe even understand how to align roles to, whatever you're going to call your worker categories for the purposes of the directive pay gap calculations. I think that's the golden ticket right there.
Interesting. I will say this is also a cultural thing, Paul, that I've noticed. Notice how politically correct she was with the large warehouse, company, blah, blah, blah. We would have just called out the company that,
Walmart or Kmart.
it starts with A and ends with A and has is
Yeah.
the in the middle. Um, yeah. But no, that's a great point. That's all, and I think for a lot of people, and I harp on it a lot. The number one thing is the job architecture.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely correct. The job architecture, without being able to measure the differences between them once you get them in there, all of a sudden for you not now you're stuck at equal pay, which is not actually the meaning of the pay equity law, and so you get stuck kind of halfway through the process without being able to define what equal pay is for equal work.
Mhm.
Um, so I really appreciate it. The one question we ask at the end, Kelly, all the time is if you could automagically, it's a highly technical term I use, you've probably heard it, fix any one thing in HR. Doesn't have to be pay equity or anything else. What would you fix?
I think it's a really hard question because I think a lot of it depends on the circumstances. But I think one of the most difficult things is to agree strategically across functions and across your executive leadership team priorities and timings. I think that's one of the most challenging things because you've got
Mm.
often things where the deadline is being driven externally, like the EU Pay Transparency Directive, and you know it's coming and you've got to be prepared for it. And that's going to take quite an amount of time and work. And your executive leadership team are worried about EBITDA. I think that's if you could magically resolve that, then I think that would be very
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I've realized actually, Paul, she's not wrong. It's a hard question. A lot of people question it. And I've never had to answer it, and we're going to keep it that way.
Oh, we'll get you.
Um,
No, we'll get you. And it's the one thing part, right? If you give the option to fix three things, that's a psychologically safer answer than like, oh, I feel like I have to get this right.
Yeah.
Or I do think we could de-stress the question in the future. It doesn't have to be the most important thing. Like, what's just a thing that you want to make go away? Like, what's something that, was a bee in your bonnet because you said under the bonnet and that made me smile before. Like, what's been the bee in your bonnet in the last week? And as a result, you want to fix it, right? We could probably de-stress the question a little bit. But we appreciate you being thoughtful, Kelly, and not wanting to just sort of throw out a layup answer, like thinking about it and making it a hard question. We appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think what it does highlight, though, the complexity saying that is how hard the freaking job is. Because I think a lot of jobs, I say, well, in serious, like it's so hard. There's no right answer, and that every company's different, and there's so many moving parts. Where I think if you talk to a lot of people at their job, they'd be like, if you could, oh my god, if I fix this thing, like everything would be
Right.
great. And here we're like, well, if you fix this, that's great. I still got a list of 10 things. Like you've lowered my list by one.
That's right.
So it does highlight just how many complexities and how many ridiculously hard problems there
Yeah.
are in comp and ben.
It's the human in HR that makes life difficult.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Kelly. I appreciate you. I know you started a new role recently and you still kept the schedule, which is awesome. And working through technical challenges is never fun. This we both know. So I really appreciate you coming on. And I do hope as part of the Reward 300, get to hang out in September. Let me know if I can pull some strings over there. I have none, but at your company. But if you can get in town. We will tag Kelly so you can reach out. She, one of the reasons I grabbed her is there's a group that chats on stuff about EUPTD and whatever, and she just always has answers. I don't know if they're right, but she always has answers.
doing my best.
Yeah,
Only time will tell.
At least as right as Sean.
Well,
yeah, the proof's in the pudding, right? Time is going to tell. We'll know in a few years' time whether I was right or not, because either we're going to be in tribunals and I will be fired, or we will be doing okay.
I think the biggest thing I noticed, to be fair though, Kelly, is all the different items you had people to look and all the things and how you should connect them. And so, again, which is why I was like, it would be great to have you on and share your thoughts. And if people have questions, reach out. I really appreciate you coming on. For all of those following us, we'll, tag Kelly, and thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelly.
Bye.